"Why so many scars, old man?" The question, sharp and laced with a casual cruelty, sliced through the low murmur of the hospital waiting room. It came from a young Marine, Sergeant Croft, whose uniform was so crisply pressed it looked like it could cut glass. His posture was perfect, his jaw set with the unshakable confidence of a man who believed his rank, and his youth made him judge, jury, and king of this small, sterile kingdom. He was speaking to an elderly man sitting quietly on one of the plastic chairs, a worn tweed jacket draped over his thin shoulders. The old man, Samuel Hayes, didn't look up at first. His hands, resting on his knees, were a testament to a long and difficult life. They were gnarled with arthritis, the skin thin as parchment. But what drew the eye was the lattice work of pale silvery scars that crisscrossed his knuckles and snaked up his forearms, disappearing under the sleeves of his simple button-down shirt. More were visible on his neck, a particularly jagged one peeking out from the collar, a faded map of some forgotten battle. Samuel finally lifted his head, and his eyes clear and steady as a winter sky met the sergeant's. There was no anger in them, no fear, just a deep, immeasurable patience. "They're old," he said, his voice a soft, growly whisper. Croft let out a short, derisive laugh. "Old? No kidding, Pops. I figured you didn't get him falling off your tricycle last week. I'm asking what from a bar fight. Get on the wrong side of a lawnmower." A few people in the waiting room shifted uncomfortably. A young nurse behind the check-in desk, Sarah, looked up from her computer, her brow furrowed with concern. She saw the scene unfolding, the brash, arrogant Marine pining for an audience, and the quiet old man who seemed to shrink under the verbal assault, yet somehow held a core of unshakable stillness. Samuel's gaze didn't waver. "It was a long time ago," he repeated, his voice still quiet, yet carrying a weight that made the sergeant's booming tone seem hollow. This placid refusal to engage seemed to infuriate Croft more than any argument could have. He saw it as disrespect, a challenge to his authority. He took a step closer, looming over the seated man. "A long time ago where? What was it? Some supply depot scuffle? Did you get a paper cut filing paperwork for a real war?" He leaned in, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial, mocking tone that carried across the entire room. "Listen, Grandpa, we see your type in here all the time. Guys who talk a big game about what they did back in the day. But those scars, they look a little too neat, a little too decorative." Sarah stood up, ready to intervene, but a stern look from her supervisor made her hesitate. This was a military hospital, and a sergeant outranked a civilian nurse in this unspoken hierarchy. She could only watch, her hands clenched into fists at her side. Croft wasn't finished. He pointed a rigid finger at the jagged scar on Uswer Samuel's neck. This one, for example, his finger was inches from the old man's skin. "What happened here?" "Trip over your shoelaces and land on a bottle cap." The room had grown quieter now. The low chatter had ceased, and all eyes were on the confrontation. Every veteran in that room, young and old, felt a collective tightening in their gut. They knew this type of arrogance, and they knew the quiet dignity of men like Samuel. Samuel's eyes finally left Croft's face, seeming to look through him, through the wall behind him, into a time and place far removed from this sterile, climate-controlled room. His expression didn't change, but something in his stillness shifted as if the temperature around him had dropped by 20. "That one," Samuel said, his voice barely audible, "was a gift." They were all gifts. Croft scoffed, throwing his hands up in theatrical disbelief. "Gifts? What kind of ridiculous answer is that? Who gave them to you?" Samuel's gaze drifted down to his own hands, turning them over slowly, studying the road map of his past. The world of the waiting room began to fade, the scent of antiseptic and floor polish replaced by the sharp metallic tang of frozen earth and cordite. The memory wasn't a choice. It was an ambush. The sergeant's pointing finger, the talk of scars, it had turned a key in a lock that had been rusted shut for over 70 years. It was the cold he remembered first, a cold so profound it felt like a living entity, a predator gnawing at bones and freezing breath in lungs. The snow wasn't white but a bruised blue-gray under a perpetually overcast sky, crunching under his boots like breaking glass. He wasn't an old man with thin shoulders, he was 20 years old, his body a tightly coiled spring of muscle and fear, a bar clutched in frozen hands. He had been part of a unit that didn't officially exist, called the Winter Ghosts. A name whispered only in the highest echelons of command. Their mission simple and impossible: disrupt enemy supply lines deep in the mountains of North Korea, miles ahead of the main UN forces, utterly alone. The scar on his neck was no bottle cap. It began with a high, thin whistle cutting through the howling wind mortar. He remembered shouting, pushing a younger soldier, Jimmy, flat into the snow just before a blinding flash erased the world. A white-hot fist slammed into the side of his neck, flipping him into the frozen earth, his blood melting the snow beneath his head into steaming crimson. Jimmy unharmed because Samuel had taken the blast. That was the gift Jimmy's life bought with a piece of his own. The scars on his hands came later, during weeks of brutal fighting, cut off and surrounded with no hope of reinforcement. They fought with bayonets, knives, bare hands. He remembered holding a bridge over a frozen river with 4 men against what felt like the entire Chinese army. The rifle stock slick in his hands, the recoil bruising his shoulder. The bayonet that sliced his hand open to the bone. The agony delayed only by the numbing cold. He held the bridge. His 4 comrades did not. Their lives were the gift purchased with the scar on his hand. Back in the waiting room, Samuel blinked slowly, the fluorescent lights harsh and alien as Croft's sneering face swam back into focus. The old man's eyes were different now, holding the chilling calm of someone who had seen the end of the world and returned. "They were given to me," Samuel said again, his voice clear and firm, "by men who had nothing left to give. They were paid for." Before Croft could respond, a new voice cut through the tension, a voice accustomed to command. "Sergeant." Croft flinched and spun around to find General Peterson standing not 10 feet away, a man whose presence made Croft's crisp uniform look like a costume. The general's eyes were fixed not on Croft but on Samuel, his expression filled with disbelief, reverence, and profound respect. He walked forward, ignoring Croft entirely, then knelt before Samuel, drawing a gasp from the room. "Samuel? Samuel Hayes, is it really you?" Samuel recognized him faintly. The general introduced himself as the son of Captain Robert Peterson of the 1st Marine Division, Chosin Reservoir. Samuel's expression softened. He had known the man. The general said his father had told him stories, whispered late at night, about a phantom unit called the Winter Ghosts. Men who held the line when no one else could. Who saved his company 3 times. Men who weren't supposed to exist. Samuel straightened at the name, a ghost resurrected. The general gently took Samuel's scarred hand and pointed to a faded tattoo. On his wrist, a wolf's head howling at a star, the mark of the ghosts. Rising, the general turned to Croft, his fury cold and controlled. "You stand in a room full of those who served. You dared to question this man's scars. You asked what scuffle caused them. Allow me to educate you." He pointed to Samuel's neck. "He got that pulling my father and 2 wounded Marines from a burning half-track under mortar fire. The shrapnel came from a round that would have killed them all. He refused a medic until every man was safe." He gestured to the hands. These he got at Chosin Reservoir after his unit ran out of ammunition. He held a pass for 4 hours with a broken rifle, a bayonet, and his bare hands. The general's voice sharpened. "Every scar is a life he saved. His file is classified. Of the 30 men in his unit, only 2 came home. He is one." Croft turned chalk white, trembling with shame as he truly saw Samuel for the first time, a living monument to courage beyond imagination. The general finished. "This man is Samuel Hayes, Medal of Honor, 2 Navy Crosses, a Silver Star, all awarded in secret. He never speaks of them because the honor wasn't in medals, it was in the survival of his brothers, the gifts they exchanged. The general ordered Croft to stand at attention, address Samuel as Sir, apologize sincerely, and report for a lesson in respect. Croft snapped to attention, tears streaming, and choked out, "Sir, I have no words. I am so sorry. My behavior was unforgivable. I apologize, sir." Samuel looked at the young, broken Marine and saw not an enemy, but a boy who had made a terrible mistake. He saw the uniform and remembered the pride he once felt wearing his own, and slowly, painfully pushed himself up from the chair. Though he stood not much taller than the sergeant, his presence seemed to fill the room as he reached out a scarred hand and gently placed it on Croft's shoulder, making the young Marine flinch as if burned. "It's all right, son," Samuel said with a voice full of weary grace rather than anger or triumph, reminding him that being a Marine was something to be proud of, but that the uniform didn't make the man what he did in it did, and that all men were once young, full of fire before the world taught them humility. After giving the sergeant's shoulder a gentle squeeze, he turned to the general and calmly insisted that all the fuss was unnecessary, that he was only there for his checkup, prompting General Peterson's eyes glistening to nod and respectfully offer his arm, walking with Samuel toward the clinic doors and leaving Croft standing alone in the silent room. A boy who had just received the harshest lesson of his life. Everyone present understood they had witnessed something sacred, arrogance humbled by history, judgment silenced by grace, and a ghost from another war, quietly reminding them of the weight carried behind scars. In a world where we pass by men like Samuel Hayes every day, seeing only age and frailty while forgetting the stories of unimaginable courage hidden behind quiet eyes, we overlook that our freedoms were paid for by the scars they bear. So the next time you see a veteran, young or old, don't just thank them, truly see them, and remember that the greatest heroes often speak the least, letting their silence and scars tell their story. And may this reminder move you to share it so the legacies of sacrifice are never forgotten.